it's lovely to introduce the wonderful Courtney Carlson. Because I know that Courtney is wonderful, I was a little bit frustrated when I was interviewing her. She wouldn't tell me any of the things that make her wonderful. She did tell me that she grew up in Wisconsin, which is helpful for you to know because her story today is about growing up in Wisconsin. She currently teaches in UW's Haub School of Environment and Natural Resources. She became a storyteller because she used to date a storyteller, and he was quite a storyteller, so she had to work hard to keep pace. He might be the very man who roped her into participating in Incite Laramie tonight. I don't know. When I asked her, though, what makes her such a great storyteller, she recoiled in horror. "Peter," she said, "bragging goes against the Midwestern Code of Honor." So she wouldn't tell me. But I think Courtney Carlson is a good storyteller because she's a wonderful listener. She loves other people's stories. She hears their voices. She respects the people whose stories she tells. What's her greatest fear? Now there she did open up. She has several, apparently. She's afraid of not finishing anything on time. She's afraid of paroxysms of indecision. She's afraid of climate change. Then she's afraid that climate change is too dark of an insight to share. She's afraid that you don't want to hear her darkness. She said that. She goes, "They don't want to hear my darkness," but I think they do. I complained to a friend in California that Courtney wouldn't tell me anything good about herself, and this friend texted back, "This is Courtney. No matter what is happening, she has a Scandinavian poise that can simultaneously plan a provocative class session and bake a perfect plum cake." There you go, Courtney. I guess if somebody else says it about you, it doesn't break the Midwestern Code of Honor. You're awesome. Please welcome Courtney Carlson and Steelworker's daughter.
Oh, Peter. All right, this talk is dedicated to my scrawny peeps in the audience, aka Eric. All right, let's start. On Friday, May 28th, 2010, a local metal shop in Racine, Wisconsin, closed its doors for good. For 88 years, the shop had been a mainstay in the factory town where I grew up. My dad worked there, first as a welder, later as a project engineer, for 29 years. Manufacturing jobs were long Racine's bread and butter. I pride myself on being able to distinguish the unique morphological features of my hometown brands from a mile away. A Case tractor, Horlicks malted milk, S.C. Johnson cleaning products, and InSinkErator garbage disposal. I would love to get inside your kitchens and reveal to you your debts to Racine. My dad's shop got the bulk of their work from Bucyrus Erie, a surface and underground mining equipment company. Founded in Ohio in 1880 and moved to South Milwaukee about a decade later, Bucyrus helped build the Panama Canal. There's Teddy Roosevelt on a steam shovel. Today, the bucket from Bucyrus's Big Muskie, a massive walking drag line, is ensconced in a small-town Ohio park honoring coal mining. Big Brutus, a stripping shovel, is the pièce de résistance of a museum in West Mineral, Kansas. And it was a Bucyrus crane that was used to rescue David Felon and Hank Throne from a collapsed Pennsylvania anthracite mine in 1963. For most of my childhood, I had no idea what my dad did at work. I knew he came home in dirty coveralls and was banished to the unfinished basement to stand under a bare metal shower head with no curtain around it until the grime ran onto the concrete and down the drain. I knew his gold wedding band was flecked by tiny bits of steel. I knew he hated the years on third shift, and I knew he regretted not being able to make a go of selling life insurance in a white collar during a brief hiatus away from his shop. But what I never knew until Bert Jensen's closed, and this is such a remarkable thing to me now, was that my dad's Rust Belt livelihood was so entwined with the coal economies of places like West Virginia, Kentucky, and Wyoming. As much a child of coal as I am of steel. Wisconsin has a long tradition of land stewardship. John Muir spent his formative years on a farm in Portage. The Menominee Nation 150 years ago established some of the world's most forward-thinking, sustainable forestry practices. And Aldo Leopold conducted his great ecological restoration experiment on a worn-down prairie next to the Wisconsin River. When the last known passenger pigeon died in Ohio Zoo, it was Wisconsinites that expressed their grief in a permanent monument to that onrushing phalanx of victorious birds now wiped from the planet. My dad, my mom, and my grandparents were in lockstep with this legacy, and yet I never heard the word conservationist as a kid. Why not? My family's values, protecting place, public health, and community, seem generally consistent with those espoused by land stewards and protectors of our ecological systems. And while my family members were happy to pledge allegiance to the unions, most stopped short of professing their loyalty to culture's greener institutions. Environmental historian Richard White produced a thesis to explain this in the 90s. In a nutshell, he said that the mainstream American environmental movement had vilified certain kinds of work in nature, especially the blue-collar work of miners, loggers, and laborers, like my dad. By viewing these livelihoods as repellent, the movement made a moral abomination of the workers themselves. A line was drawn in the sand, separating friends, communities, regions. On one side, the privileged few who would shield wild places from all human activity except recreation, and on the other, the laborers who couldn't refrain from doing destructive work in nature. By the time my dad's shop folded, I was out of grad school and teaching environmental and natural resources courses at the University of Wyoming. I thought I should help, but I didn't know how. Early in my career, I felt like I was already being asked to line up on the side opposite my dad, opposite my home. I teach White every semester. His decades-old observation that the modern environmental movement separated recreationists from the working class still resonates with many of my students, especially the children of ranchers, oil workers, and coal country laborers. They feel we are still picking sides, then looking around to see who joined us and who didn't. The legal scholar Jedediah Purdy has written beautifully about a moment when stewardship's capacity for collaboration seemed far less bleak. Consider the Miners for Democracy, whose brief takeover of the United Mine Workers of America in the 70s was based on the premise that worker safety and environmental responsibility were two sides of the same coin, and that the industry owed both to workers. Or Walter Reuther, Union of Auto Workers president and one of the key funders of the first Earth Day 27 years ago. His death in a plane crash in 1970 meant the end of his efforts to mobilize workers as a force against pollution by adding environmental concerns to the top of the union's collective bargaining agenda. Or Senator Ed Muskie of Maine, who asserted at that first Earth Day, man's environment includes more than natural resources. It includes the shape of the communities in which he lives, his home, his schools, his places of work. Things could have gone differently. Things still can. It took my dad 2 years to find another metalworkers union job after his shop shuttered, such is the rate of decline in Racine's industrial sector today. When I told my mom about this talk, she made herself an industrial graveyard documentarian, flooding me with images of the neglected factories where so many of my family members once worked. We know that the current Rust Belt isn't well adapted to the pressures of the modern economic ecosystem. We know that cheap natural gas is outcompeting the coal that kept my dad's shop open for almost a century. We also know that many species of green jobs are healthy and growing in number. Around our nation's many empty lots, boarded up warehouses, and abandoned mines live dynamic human communities, homes, schools, places of work, natural resources, every last one worth saving. So perhaps the most indomitable thing we the people could do right now, the bravest and most lion-hearted act of all, would be to draw a much bigger circle around what and who ought to elicit our care, our solutions, our stewardship. Because there's no chance of rallying devotion to our big damaged world if we can't first rally devotion to our families, neighbors, and communities.